I've been asked if I'll make a video with some tips for holding the 7-string bass. So here goes with some general thoughts and principles which I hope you might find useful. I'm going to start with just a main kind of guiding principle of, and this applies to holding any size of viol. I'm going to work on the basis that our body is important, damageable, and we only get one. So we've got to look after it. This is essentially a piece of wood. So the main aim when holding any instrument, actually, never mind a viol, never mind specifically a 7-string, anything, is that whatever we settle on has to be a position where we are comfortable and we're not doing ourselves any kind of lasting damage, rather than one where we say, right, this is my viol, how do I arrange myself to fit round it? We're going to go from the principle of, this is me, how do I arrange this to sit itself and work around me? So that's the main principle. If you find yourself having to do things, stretch things, reach round things, we've gone wrong somewhere along the line. The main principle is that we're going to keep ourselves comfortable. So the first thing to think about before we talk about how we sit, I want to just think about what we sit on. So I am sitting just at the minute on an ordinary chair. I've taken the cushion off because I find it slightly too high with it on there. It's important that the seat of your chair is flat and not tilting backwards on itself. It's an unbelievable number of chairs where the seat is just angled back slightly. And if you're not careful, you get your hips lower than your knees. And that is a recipe for all sorts of disaster. You find some people actually manipulate it so that their seat is the other way around. They sit on a wedge-shaped cushion so that if anything, you're angled slightly forwards. Matter of personal taste, but at the very least, your chair needs to be flat and not leaning backwards. It's really important that the height of your chair means that you can have both feet, in this case wearing elegant fluffy slippers, flat on the floor. It's really important that we don't end up on tiptoe with heels in the air, because that will cut off all sorts of bits of circulation. If your chair is too low, you end up with your knees sort of inconveniently close to your elbows, and you introduce the very real problem, or you exacerbate the already existing problem of bowing yourself in the knees. So a chair that's too low is not helpful either. But on the other hand, if I put a cushion on here and make this chair very much higher, I'm now at such an angle here, the instrument sits so low down that I'm having to go quite a long way with the top half of my body to get the bow near enough to the bridge. So that's not helpful either. Height of chair, I think, is really important. So I would spend some time selecting the perfect chair. Saw a bit off the legs if it's too high. Stick an extra bit on if it's not high enough. But I think it's critical that you sit at the right height. So once we've found our perfect chair, what are we aiming for? We're aiming, like I said, for both feet to be flat on the floor. You need to be sitting towards the front of the chair because there needs to be enough space for the instrument to fit between your knees and the chair that you're sitting on. If you're too far back, you're just squashed before you start. So right forwards on your chair. Sit so that you are upright and comfortable. And then let's think about what we do with this. So your main aim is for you to sit comfortably. None of this, none of this, none of this. That's what we're going for. Several things to consider then. What are our main requirements technically for the instrument that we need to be able to achieve, and that the way that we sit can either really help with or really hinder with? And I think there are maybe two that are most important. One is that we have to be able to play on the top string near the bridge, but without bowing into our knees. That is a very real problem, isn't it, on these things, that our knees get in the way. And the other one is that particularly on a 7 string, we've got to be able to play the bottom string. And this is potentially a problem, isn't it, that we're squashed with our hand stuck on our leg, all squashed into the side of the instrument. You're poking yourself in the ribs with your elbow to be able to kind of squish yourself into that bottom string. So we've got to be able to solve both of those problems. So the instrument is going to sit here predominantly, and there are several things that we can adjust to help us achieve both of those things. So the first thing is the height at which it sits. The second is the angle of rotation here. The third is the uprightness, the angle left to right. And the fourth is the angle forwards and backwards. Those are basically the things that we've got to play with, the things that we can adjust. So let's take them one at a time. Height is critical because there is a certain height at which your knee is, and if you hold the instrument so that the bridge is lower than your knee, you're absolutely guaranteed to poke yourself. So we've got to sit the viol high enough up that we can at least stand a chance of getting round here. You can do that by raising the instrument. Absolutely don't do it by lifting your feet up in the air to make the instrument sit higher. That's a recipe for disaster. Heels still flat on the floor. If you bring your feet slightly closer together, it will push the instrument slightly higher. If we're too high, we're going to introduce problems up here of having to reach up for the left hand. You could lower your knee slightly by having your left foot potentially slightly further forward. I mean, if you move your foot forward, your knee sinks. So you might just think about that. The other thing that achieves is that the angle that we have the instrument at massively shifts where the extremes of strings are. So if I angle it so that the bass strings are closer into my body and the treble strings are further out here, it really changes how far round you need to reach to be able to play on the top string. So it's an advantage to have the bass strings tucked in towards you and the treble strings further out. And again, you can do that by having your left foot slightly further forward. But if we do that too much, we're starting to introduce complete twist into our body. And the golden rule is that we sit comfortably and we move this. So I play definitely with my left foot slightly further forward, but I also play with the instrument sitting further forwards on my left leg and tucked much more in towards me. It's behind my knee on my right leg. The exact place that you have it in is going to depend on the length of your legs, on the size of your viol, on the height of your chair, but those are things you might think about. So we're aiming to have the top strings further out. We're aiming to not have the viol completely upright in that direction, because the more upright it is, the further round we're going to have to reach for the top string. So definitely with the peg box angled over your left shoulder. If you sit it completely upright, we are again going to have to reach right round. If you lie it completely back, you're much more likely to bow your knees. So just experiment, move things around. What is the optimum place that means you can get near the bridge on the top string, but completely miss your knee? You don't need to miss it by miles, but you need to miss it by enough that it's not a constant worry every time you get to the top string and you think, I wonder if I'm going to bow my knees. You need to not be, there's enough other things to think about, so let's not be worrying about that. So we've got this in a great place now for the top string. I'm sitting nice and comfortably I can get round that top string and my knee is nowhere in sight. However, if I come to the bottom string, completely stuck. There just isn't room. Absolutely no space to play this. So to play the bottom string, I need the instrument much further forward to just give myself a bit of freedom over here. But if I put the viol there, which suits the bottom string very nicely, obviously I can't reach the top. And this is why you see people move the viol forwards and backwards, because all we're doing is arranging for there to be space to play that bottom string. So it's got to be movable. Once you've moved it, you have to move it back to be able to reach the top string. So there isn't a position in which you sit and you jolly well stay there, and 2 hours later, when you stop for tea, in the middle of your consort session, you have to unravel yourself and stretch. You should be flexible, you should be able to move, you should be able to move this as you play. But those are the basic principles, that at all times, your whole foot, flat foot, should be on the floor. Never ever play with your heels up in the air. That your options for moving the instruments are height, up and down, angle of bass strings in towards yourself, left to right, swing that way, forwards and backwards that way. And if you experiment with the full range of those, but you also see them as a movable feast, you should find you can get round everything you need and that you are still sitting comfortably.